And so, as we talk about teenagers and sticking to really the chemicals that change in the body, the hormonal changes, a lot of things happen. The brain is rewiring; it's getting rid of certain pathways that aren't being used, and so the teenage years are a huge piece at a physiological level. And how does that then translate to what we're dealing with the, incorporating the understanding of what early childhood trauma has done to a child? Because I see a lot of teenagers who maybe have done fairly well, and then once they get to that teenage stage, you see a lot of biochemical pieces showing up. Like all of a sudden, this child is really what we suspected. He is bipolar, or wow, that really is a state that we suspected early on, but the presentation of it now in the teenage years is much more clear.
I think it's so important to deal with those primary medical considerations, because I always talked about dealing with the most impairing symptoms first. Kids who are out of control, kids whose brain chemistry is wild and crazy and they're very aggressive, or their moods are off the charts, or they're so profoundly depressed they can't function. One has to deal with those medical correlates and biological correlates very quickly and very aggressively, so then you can get some semblance of reality, because without that intervention they will get crazy and out of control. It's also so important to realize that during those teenage years, many children who have been traumatized, chemicals have already been altered, but it's something called triggers and mechanisms. During teenage years and the brain chemistry, the trauma just continues to fester. It's always been there. The stress hormones have never gone away. It's always been off whack, and it's just a cascade effect. You put in testosterone, you put in estrogen, you put in all the normal biochemistry that goes along with a normal teenager. It was never right to start with. That was just the bad point in time that it would just get totally out of control. Medical interventions are very important. Those are the times to really calm the child down and keep them on a very strong adults-only program, and maybe reduce outside influences, because they have so much energy. They're going to be running away, acting up, acting out with other people, and also in the community where they get in trouble. So it's important to not only to address the medical considerations, but to remember that the child still needs the family, probably even more so than they did when they were younger.
And that's a dichotomy, because we're talking about a stage when children are moving away from the dependence of the family system. They're trying to then pull into their own independence and create themselves as a single unit in the world. But our children aren't ready for that. And so I think that's why we do find such a difficult time parenting our teenagers, especially the traumatized ones, is that they really aren't ready. They don't have the resources within them, the coping mechanisms, to be able to sustain themselves independently. But now, as a parent then, switching to sort of how does a parent do that? How do you pull in the reins, limit them a little bit more? Because we're not talking about a 5-year-old who you can certainly limit in a house and contain and protect a little bit easier. This is a teenager at 15 that knows, hey, I'll just steal the car keys and I'll run out the door and I'll just take care of life myself. So how do you contain a child at that teenage stage? Because it is so very different than the younger child.
Well, it's a tough venture, because a lot of parents say, well, they have to get it together on their own. That's a big parental ideology. They have to get it together on their own. The therapist will do it for them. Certainly, they may need some professional help. That's the time when I usually tell parents, you know what? Slow down the developmental process. They're just not ready to go to school at that point. They're not ready to be around a lot of other kids. They need a lot more directive supervision. You have to develop your support team, meaning that their friends, you better know their parents. You better know where they're going. You better be able to keep them under your control and your roof, so you know what's happening. I'm not saying to totally shut them out from the world and their friends, because they do need that. But it has to be much more controlled. And again, this is where parents have to help parents and develop a